the widow who saved a dying ranch and found a home she could keep. The first time Clara Whitcomb saw the Barrow Creek homestead, she knew it was not empty because no one lived there. It was empty because someone loved there once and had been taken away. The house stood low against the Montana wind, its porch boards gray with dust, its windows dim, its garden fence leaning like a tired old man. A bay horse shifted near the water trough, stamping at flies. Somewhere behind the barn, a loose shutter knocked softly in the breeze, steady as a warning. Clara sat on the wagon seat with both hands folded tight in her lap. Her black gloves were worn thin at the fingertips. She had mended them twice already, just as she had mended her dress, her bonnet ribbon, and the last scraps of pride she had left after losing her own claim. Beside the porch stood Caleb Mercer, the man who had put the notice in town. Wanted, respectable woman for housework, kitchen, garden, dairy, and hens. Fair wages. Room provided, no foolishness. He was tall, sun-browned, and lean from hard work. His hat shaded most of his face, but not the grief in it. Grief had a way of showing itself even when a person tried to hide it. Clara knew that better than most. He took one step down from the porch as she climbed from the wagon. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" "Yes." His eyes moved to the trunk tied behind the wagon, then back to her face. Not in a rude way, in a measuring way. A man deciding whether the person before him could stand the weight of a place that had already broken once. "I'm Caleb Mercer," he said. "I reckon the ride from Clearwater was hard." "I've known harder rides." A faint look passed through his eyes, but he did not ask. Clara was grateful for that. He turned and looked over the yard as if seeing it through her eyes. The weeds near the well, the sagging chicken run, the dead vines curled around the garden stakes, the milk shed door hanging open, the house swept clean but cold like a room kept ready for someone who would never return. Then he said the words, "This place needs a woman's hand." Clara did not move, but something inside her did. The words should have been plain, work words, frontier words, nothing more. A man alone on a homestead needed help with the tasks his wife once handled. There was no shame in it, no insult. Still, they struck the old bruise beneath her ribs. A woman's hand. She had once used her own 2 hands to build a life. Out beyond Red Willow Bend, Clara and her husband Thomas had taken a claim when hope was still young in them. They had raised a cabin from cottonwood logs, planted beans in stubborn dirt, dug a well with blistered palms, and watched the first green shoots rise like little promises. Thomas used to stand in the doorway at dusk and say, "One day, Clara, this place will know our names." Then winter fever took him. After that, everything changed but the work. The cows still bawled. The stove still needed wood. The claim still demanded proof, improvement, cultivation, residence. Hard words on paper, harder still for a widow with no brother nearby and no money for hired help. Clara fought for it anyway. She fought until Mr. Silas Greer came. He was not a gunman, not a robber with a mask. He wore a clean coat, carried folded papers, and smiled like a church deacon. He knew the land laws the way a wolf knows a weak gate. He filed against her claim, saying she had failed the requirements, saying the land should be opened again, saying the law was the law. By the time Clara understood the trap, her home was gone. No blood on the floor, no shouting in the street. Just signatures, stamps, and a man at the land office telling her he was sorry while refusing to meet her eyes. She walked away with one trunk, one quilt, Thomas's watch, and the bitter lesson that a thief with papers could steal cleaner than any thief with a pistol. Now Caleb Mercer was saying this homestead needed a woman's hand, and Clara had to steady herself before the past showed on her face. Caleb seemed to mistake her silence for doubt. "I mean no disrespect," he said quickly. "My wife Ruth kept this place right. Since she passed, I've kept the stock fed and the fields turned, but the rest has gone poorly. I can pay fair. You'll have your own room, lock on the door, I won't trouble you." Clara looked toward the garden. Even under the weeds, she could see someone's care. Rose had once been straight. The rose bush near the porch had not died, though no one had pruned it in a long while. A woman had chosen where the kitchen herbs should catch the morning sun. A woman had hung little blue glass bottles along the fence to flash light at the birds. This was not a rough bachelor's place. It was a widower's place. That was worse. "Your wife planted those roses," Clara asked. Caleb followed her gaze. For the first time, his mouth softened. Ruth said a house without flowers looked like it was holding its breath. The words hung between them. Clara heard the shutter knock again behind the barn. The bay horse lifted its head. Dust slipped across the yard in a thin, golden veil. What happened to her? Clara asked, though she already knew part of the answer, not the details, but the shape. Loss had shapes. Childbed fever, Caleb said. His voice stayed even, but his fingers closed once at his side. The baby, too. Clara lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. So am I, he said. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the dead vines. Somewhere inside the house, a loose curtain stirred, pale as a ghost. Clara should have turned away. She had promised herself she would never again pour her heart into land that was not hers. Never again wake before dawn for a place that could be taken by law, death, or a man with a clean coat and cruel patience. Work was safer when she kept her heart out of it. But then she saw the milk pails turned upside down beside the shed, the cracked garden hoe leaning forgot near the fence, and one small child's wooden horse half buried in dust near the porch step. A grief like that did not ask politely. It sat in every corner. Caleb cleared his throat. I don't expect miracles, Mrs. Whitcomb. Just meals, washing, and whatever can be done before winter. Clara looked at him then, really looked. He was not asking for comfort. Men like him rarely did. He was asking for help while pretending it was only work. His eyes were tired from more than sun. His shoulders carried a weight no plow team could pull. Behind him, the whole homestead seemed to wait for her answer. And somewhere deep inside Clara, under the scar left by Sela's Greer and the lost land at Red Willow Bend, something old and stubborn stirred. The knowledge had cost her everything, but it was still hers. She stepped past Caleb and walked to the garden gate. The hinges complained when she pushed it open. Weeds brushed against her skirt. She bent, took a handful of soil and rubbed it between her fingers. Dry on top, better underneath. Not dead. Only neglected. Like some hearts. She stood and turned back to him. I'll take the room, she said. I'll take the wages. I'll keep the house and bring what I can back before frost. Caleb gave a small nod, as if afraid to show relief. Thank you. But understand me, Mr. Mercer, Clara added. I don't work in shadows and I don't answer to gossip. I do honest work for honest pay. That suits me. And I won't throw out your wife's ways just to prove my own. At that, Caleb looked at her sharply. Clara glanced toward the roses. A woman's hand has already been here, she said. I can see it. If I'm to help, I'll not bury hers. For the first time since Clara had arrived, Caleb Mercer looked as though someone had set down a burden he had been carrying alone. He removed his hat. Then you're welcome here, Mrs. Whitcomb. Clara nodded, though welcome was a dangerous word. It could make a lonely person hope. She went back to the wagon for her trunk. As Caleb lifted one end of it, the lid shifted, and Thomas's old watch inside gave a soft, familiar tick against the wood. Clara heard it and froze. Time had taken much from her. Land, husband, name on a deed, future. But as she looked across the dying homestead, she felt the strangest fear of all. Not that she would fail to save it. That she might save it, love it, and lose it all over again. And far down the lane, where the dust road bent toward Clearwater, a rider in a dark coat paused beneath the cottonwoods and watched the Mercer place with patient eyes. The first morning at Barrow Creek began before the sun showed its face. Clara woke in the little back room with gray light pressing against the curtains and the house still quiet around her. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. The ceiling was lower than the one in her old cabin. The wind came through a different crack. The bed rope creaked under her in an unfamiliar way. Then she remembered. Caleb Mercer's homestead. Ruth's house. Not hers. She lay still and listened. Outside, a rooster made a rough, uncertain sound as if he had forgotten his own duty. Somewhere in the barn, a horse knocked against a stall board. The old clock in the front room ticked slow and uneven. Clara turned her head and saw her trunk at the foot of the bed. Thomas's watch was inside, wrapped in a handkerchief. She had not opened it the night before. Some memories were easier to carry when they stayed folded away. She dressed in silence, pinned her hair, and stepped into the hall. The house looked different in morning light, not better, more honest. Dust sat along the window ledges. The stove had been blacked, but poorly, as if done by a man who knew the task mattered but not how to finish it right. A stack of clean plates stood in the cupboard, though each one seemed placed there without thought. The table was bare except for a salt jar, a chipped cup, and a folded piece of blue cloth. Clara paused when she saw the cloth. It had been tucked beneath a small wooden box on the side shelf. The stitching along the edge was neat, tiny, and patient. Ruth's work, surely. Clara did not touch it, not yet. She went to the stove, set kindling, and struck a match. The small flame caught, then strengthened. Soon the kitchen filled with the first breath of heat. Clara rolled up her sleeves and began looking through the pantry. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, dried apples, and one jar of peaches saved from a better year. Enough to feed a man, not enough to comfort one. By the time Caleb stepped inside from the barn, breakfast was on the table. He stopped just over the threshold. Clara had seen that look before. A person returning to a room expecting loneliness and finding something gentler waiting there. It could hurt almost as much as hunger. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He removed his hat and stood a moment longer than he needed to. "I can eat after chores if you'd rather," he said. "Food is hot now." He nodded, washed at the basin, and sat. Clara placed coffee before him, then eggs with fried potatoes and a biscuit split open with butter. He looked at the plate as if it were a letter from another life. "You found butter?" he asked. "I found cream that had not quite given up." A small breath left him. It almost became a laugh, but it did not know how. They ate quietly. Clara had learned long ago that silence at a table could be either cold or kind. This one was not yet kind, but it was trying. When Caleb finished, he reached for his cup and said, "You needn't make it fine every morning." It wasn't fine, it was breakfast. He looked up at her, still. Clara took his plate. "A place can go hungry in more than one way, Mr. Mercer." His eyes lowered to the table. After breakfast, Clara began with the house. She did not sweep through it like a new mistress claiming corners. She moved carefully, the way a person might step through a church. She opened windows one at a time. She shook rugs over the porch rail. She washed curtains yellowed by stove smoke. She scrubbed the pantry shelves and lined them with paper. She sorted what had spoiled, what could be saved, and what should have been thrown out a year ago. Everywhere she found Ruth. Ruth in the careful labels on jars. Ruth in the pressed flowers tucked inside a Bible. Ruth in the little marks carved along the kitchen doorframe, no higher than a toddler's reach. Ruth in a tin of buttons arranged by color. Ruth in the blue cloth still folded on the shelf. Near midday, Clara opened the bottom drawer of the kitchen dresser and found a packet of letters tied with brown string. She should have closed it. Instead, she stood there with one hand on the drawer pull, staring down. The top envelope was addressed to Mrs. Ruth Mercer, Barrow Creek, Montana Territory. The handwriting was curved and bold, a woman's hand. Clara did not read it. She did not even lift it. But she saw a dried rose petal caught beneath the string, so thin it looked like a small piece of sunset. Her throat tightened. Some women left behind grand things: land, money, portraits over mantels. Most left smaller proofs: a labeled jar, a mended cuff, a rose that outlived the hand that planted it, a packet of letters no one had the courage to open. Clara slid the drawer shut and rested her palm against it. "I won't trouble what's yours," she whispered, though Ruth Mercer could not hear her. When she turned, Caleb was standing in the doorway. His face had gone pale under the dust. Clara pulled her hand away from the drawer. "I was cleaning," she said. "I know. I didn't open them." "I know," he said again. The wind moved the clean curtain behind her. For a long moment, he looked not at Clara but at the dresser. "I haven't opened that drawer since she died," he said. Clara did not answer. There were some confessions that needed no reply. Caleb stepped back. "I came to say I'll be in the north field till sundown." "All right." He turned to go, then stopped. "Mrs. Whitcomb." "Yes." Thank you for not moving her things too quick." Clara nodded once. After he left, she stood alone in the kitchen, hearing his boots fade from the porch. She understood now that this work would be harder than she had allowed herself to think. Dirt could be scrubbed, weeds could be pulled, sour milk could be thrown out and replaced. But grief had roots. That afternoon, she went to the garden. The sun was high and sharp, but a cool wind came over the grassland. Clara tied a cloth around her hair, took up the hoe, and began at the first row. The weeds were thick, greedy things. They had swallowed the old path stones and wrapped themselves around the bean poles. She worked slowly at first, learning what had been there. Carrots gone wild, onions choked but living, sage near the fence, mint that had spread beyond all manners, a row of rose canes by the porch, thorny and stubborn. By late afternoon, sweat had dampened her collar. Dirt marked her cheek. Her hands ached in the familiar way. The familiar way was the dangerous part. At Red Willow Bend, she had worked until her hands cramped, and Thomas would come behind her with a tin cup of water, teasing that she was trying to outwork the mule. She could almost hear him as she knelt in Caleb Mercer's garden, pulling weeds from soil that did not know her name. She sat back on her heels and looked toward the distant road. The rider in the dark coat was gone. Maybe she had imagined him last evening. Maybe the bend in the road had held only shadow. But Clara had survived Sela's grier by learning not to dismiss the small unease that gathers in the bones before trouble arrives. Near supper, Caleb came from the field with his shirt sleeves rolled and dust in the lines of his face. He stopped at the garden fence. Clara had cleared only 3 rows. To most eyes, it would not have looked like much. To a homesteader, it looked like breath returning. Caleb rested one hand on the fence post. His gaze moved over the open soil, the saved onions, the straightened path stones. "Ruth planted mint there," he said quietly, "said it was impossible to kill." She was right. This time Caleb did laugh, faint but real. It changed his face so much that Clara looked away. A dangerous thing, a widower's first laugh after sorrow. A woman could mistake it for sunlight. That night after supper, Caleb went to mend harness by the stove while Clara washed dishes. They did not speak much. The house, however, no longer felt quite so dead. The lamp burned steady. The floor smelled of lye soap. Bread cooled under a towel. Outside, the bay horse gave a soft nicker in the dark. As Clara dried the last plate, there came a knock at the door. Not a neighbor's knock. Not friendly. Caleb looked up. Clara felt her hands still on the dish towel. The knock came again, firm and patient. Caleb rose, crossed the room, and opened the door. A man stood on the porch with a dark coat, polished boots, and a smile Clara remembered from the worst day of her life. Silas Greer held his hat against his chest, as if he had come to pay respects. "Evening, Mr. Mercer," he said. "I was passing through and thought it proper to call." Then his eyes slid past Caleb and found Clara. The smile did not leave his face, but something colder entered it. "Well now," he said softly, "Mrs. Whitcomb, I had heard you'd taken work nearby." Clara gripped the dish towel until her fingers hurt. Caleb turned slightly toward her, reading the change in the room. "You know this man?" he asked. Clara did not blink. "Yes," she said, "he stole my homestead." Silas Greer stood in the doorway as calm as a banker counting coins. The lamp inside the Mercer house threw warm light across his face, but it did not soften him. Men like Greer could stand in the glow of any hearth and still bring a cold draft with them. His coat was brushed clean. His collar was white. His boots had not seen one honest mile of mud that day. Caleb kept one hand on the open door. "Mrs. Whitcomb says you stole her homestead," he said. Greer gave a small, sorrowful shake of his head. "Grief makes people remember things in painful ways." Clara stepped forward before Caleb could answer. Her heart was beating hard, but her voice stayed even. "No, grief made me slow. You made me landless." The room changed after that. Even the stove seemed to quiet. Greer looked at her with the same patient pity he had worn at the land office 2 years before, when he stood beside the clerk and watched her claim pass out of her name. She had been shaking then, not from fear, but from not understanding how a thing could be legal and wicked at the same time. Now her hands were steady. "You failed to meet the claim requirements," Greer said. "I merely followed the law." "You followed me," Clara replied. "You watched when Thomas died. You watched when my fence went down in the storm. You watched when my field lay half-planted because I was digging a grave and trying to keep cattle alive. Then you filed before I even knew what paper to ask for." Greer's smile thinned. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Is that true?" "I filed a lawful contest," Greer said. "The government does not give land to sentiment, Mr. Mercer. It gives land to those who prove it." The words landed hard in Clara's chest. She had heard them before. She had heard them in offices, in whispers, from men who mistook paperwork for righteousness. Caleb opened the door wider, not in welcome, but in warning. "State your business and be gone." Greer looked around the room as if taking inventory. His eyes moved over the scrubbed floor, the fresh bread under its towel, the mended curtain, the lamp burning clean. Then they drifted toward Clara's hands, rough from the garden. "I came to inquire about purchasing a few head of cattle," he said, "but I can see Mr. Mercer has found help." "A housekeeper," Caleb said. "How fortunate," Greer's eyes returned to Clara. "Some hands do make land look better than it is." Clara understood the hidden edge of that sentence. He was measuring the place. Not buying cattle, not passing through, measuring. She had watched him do the same at Red Willow Bend. A glance at fences. A question about acreage, a polite mention of the land office. He never pounced at first. He circled. He waited until grief or debt or ignorance opened a gate. Clara folded the dish towel and set it on the table. "This place is not for sale," she said. Greer smiled. Most places are once a man knows their true condition. Caleb took a step forward. "You heard her." Greer looked at him then, and for the first time his politeness cooled. "I did, though I wonder when hired help began speaking for owners." Clara felt the sting, but she did not show it. Caleb did. "In my house," he said, "a decent woman may speak without asking leave." The words were simple, but they struck Clara in a place she had not guarded. At Red Willow Bend, when Greer had challenged her, too many men had watched her stand alone and said nothing. Some had pitied her. Some had avoided her eyes. None had stood beside her. Greer noticed the silence that followed. His gaze flickered between them. "Of course," he said lightly, "no offense meant." "Plenty was meant," Caleb said. The bay horse shifted outside, its hoof scraping the packed dirt near the porch. The night wind pressed against the door and carried in the smell of dry grass. Greer put on his hat. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Whitcomb." He stepped back from the doorway, but before he turned, he gave Clara one last look. Not pity now, recognition. He knew she remembered too much. When he walked down the porch steps, Caleb stayed at the door until the sound of Greer's horse faded down the lane. Only then did he close it. The room held its breath. Clara picked up the dish towel again, though there was nothing left to dry. Caleb turned toward her. "Tell me everything." She wanted to say there was nothing to tell, that the hour was late, that old wounds did not need digging open in a stranger's kitchen. But Greer had come to Barrow Creek. That changed things. So Clara sat at the table, folded her hands, and told Caleb Mercer the story she had spent 2 years swallowing. She told him about Red Willow Bend, about the cabin Thomas built with a crooked chimney he had loved too much to fix. She told him about the well they dug so deep her shoulders ached for weeks. She told him how Thomas used to press seeds into her palm each spring and say, "Put the future in the ground, Clara." Her voice nearly broke there, but she forced it steady. Then she told him about the fever, the funeral in frozen earth, the cows bawling through the night because no one had strength left to milk them, the fence lost to a storm, the notice she had not understood, the contest, the land office, Sela's Greer standing clean and patient while her world was taken by ink. Caleb sat across from her, his face dark with anger, but he did not interrupt. That made the telling easier. "When it was over," Clara said, "I kept going back in my mind, every paper, every date, every witness I should have brought, every question I should have asked. It near drove me mad at first. Then I learned. I learned what residence means, what cultivation means, what improvements must be shown. I learned how men like Greer use law against people too tired to read the teeth inside it." Caleb looked toward the dark window. My claim is not proved up yet. I know. His eyes returned to her. How do you know? Because this house still carries that kind of weighting, and because Greer would not have come if it were safe. The words settled between them like dust after a dropped plate. Caleb leaned back slowly. I was to finish the paperwork last year, he said. Ruth had kept the records, dates, plantings, repairs, purchases, everything. After she died, I let it sit. I kept telling myself I would take it up when I could bear to open her drawer. Clara thought of the packet of letters, the closed places grief makes in a home. How much land is under cultivation? She asked. Less than there should be. Fences. South fence is sound, north needs posts, garden was lost till you came. Receipts, witnesses, any record of residence. Caleb looked tired now, not from labor but from seeing danger where sorrow had blinded him. Some, not enough maybe. Clara stood and moved to the stove, needing to do something with her hands. She lifted the kettle, though it was already hot. We start tomorrow, she said. With what? Everything: garden rows, dairy, hens, fence repairs, written records, names of neighbors who have seen the place worked, dates if we can find them, Ruth's records if they exist. At Ruth's name, Caleb's expression closed. Clara softened her voice. I won't open what you tell me not to open, but if she kept homestead records, they may be the strongest thing you have. He stared at the table for a long while. I don't know if I can look through her things. I know. No, he said, and his voice roughened. I don't think you do. Clara looked at him then, not sharply, but fully. I carried my husband's coat in my wagon for 9 months because I could not bear to hang it or sell it or sleep near it. I kept his pipe, though he was the only one who used it. I know a little. Caleb's face changed. The anger went out of him, leaving only sorrow. I'm sorry, he said. So am I. The old clock ticked between them. At last, Caleb stood and went to the kitchen dresser. He put his hand on the bottom drawer but did not open it. His fingers rested there, trembling once. Clara looked away to give him the mercy of not being watched. The drawer scraped open. A small sound, but in that house it felt like thunder. Caleb drew out the packet of letters first, then a worn ledger bound in brown cloth. He held it like it might vanish. Ruth wrote everything down, he said. Clara stepped closer. On the cover in careful ink were the words, Barrow Creek account and claim book. Caleb opened it. The pages were filled with Ruth's neat hand, planting dates, fence repairs, livestock counts, butter sales, seed orders, weather notes, names of neighbors who helped raise the barn, even small sketches of garden rows and orchard plans. Clara felt a rush of hope so strong it frightened her. She may have saved you before either of us knew you needed saving, she whispered. Caleb touched one page with his thumb. A loose paper slipped from the back of the ledger and fell to the floor. Clara bent to pick it up, then stopped when she saw the words written across the top. Notice of deficiency. The date was nearly 8 months old. Caleb stared down at it as if the floor had opened. I never saw that, he said. Clara lifted the paper carefully. Her eyes moved over the lines, and with every word the danger became clearer. The land office had already warned him. Certain improvements were incomplete. Cultivation was in question. Final proof would require witness testimony and updated records. At the bottom was a second note in another hand. Failure to answer may invite contest. Clara's mouth went dry. Caleb whispered, Ruth must have tucked it in the ledger before she died. No, Clara said quietly. She died 2 years ago. He looked up. Clara turned the paper toward the lamp. This notice came last winter. The house went silent. Then Caleb reached for the ledger again, flipping to the last pages. Ruth's neat writing ended 2 years earlier. But after several blank sheets, there were newer marks. Not Ruth's hand. Not Caleb's. Short notes, dates, observations about field neglect, fence damage, acreage, and absence of visible cultivation. Clara had seen that writing before. On the paper that took Red Willow Bend from her, Her fingers went cold. Caleb looked at the page, then at Clara. Someone had been inside the Mercer house. Someone had opened Ruth's drawer. Someone had been keeping records for Silas Greer. Outside, beyond the lamplit windows, the wind moved through the cottonwoods along the road. Clara turned toward the dark glass, and for one terrible second, she thought she saw a figure standing just beyond the garden fence. Then the lantern flame bent in the draft, and the figure was gone. If this moment made your heart tighten, stay with the story, because Clara had just learned the danger was not coming to Barrow Creek. It had already been there. Clara did not sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen long after Caleb had gone to the barn to check the horses for the third time, long after the lamp burned low and the last heat faded from the stove. Ruth's ledger lay open on the table. Beside it sat the notice from the land office and the strange pages written in a hand that did not belong in that house. Outside, Barrow Creek lay under a thin moon. The yard looked silver and still, but stillness no longer comforted Clara. A homestead could seem peaceful while danger walked its edges. She read the notes again. North fence down near wash. Garden untended. Dairy unused. Owner absent from house several evenings. No visible proof of steady cultivation. The words were plain, but Clara could feel Silas Greer behind them. He wrote like a man building a cage one board at a time. Not accusations yet. Not even lies exactly. Just enough truth gathered in a cruel season and twisted toward a purpose. Caleb came back in near midnight, carrying the smell of hay and cold air with him. No tracks by the garden, he said. Winds covered most everything. Clara nodded. Then we look in daylight. He stood near the door, hat in hand. You think Greer had someone watching this place? I think Greer never walks where another man can crawl for him. Caleb looked toward the ledger, and someone got inside. Yes. His face hardened. I should have known. No, Clara said, you were grieving. That's no defense when land is at stake. It should be, she said, sharper than she meant to. Then her voice lowered. But men like Greer count on the world not caring what grief does to a person. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat. For a while he said nothing. His hands rested on the table, large and rough, the knuckles cracked from years of work. Clara noticed a small scar near his thumb, white against the brown skin, a working scar, an old one. Every homesteader carried a map of losses on their hands. I let Ruth's place fall apart, he said at last. Clara looked at him. He stared at the ledger, but she knew he was seeing the years behind it. She kept everything alive. The garden, the house, the books, the neighbors, the laughter. I did the plowing and the cattle and thought that was half the world. Then she was gone and I learned it had been less than half. I could mend a fence, but not the quiet. I could milk a cow, but not keep the dairy sweet. I could sweep the floor, but the house still felt like a room after a funeral. His voice grew rough. So I worked outside till dark and came in only when I had to. I told myself I was holding on. Truth is, I was hiding from every corner she used to stand in. Clara folded her hands in her lap. She wanted to comfort him, but comfort could be clumsy if offered too quickly. So she let the words remain where he had put them. After a time, she said, a place can forgive neglect when the neglect came from sorrow, but the law does not. That is why we must make the land speak louder than Greer does. Caleb lifted his eyes. Tell me what to do. Those 5 words carried more trust than Clara expected. At Red Willow Bend, men had told her what she should have done after it was too late. They said she should have kept better records, should have found witnesses, should have known the deadlines, should have asked for help. No one had ever looked at her before ruin came and said, tell me what to do. She drew a clean sheet from Ruth's ledger and dipped the pen. First, we write down every improvement made since you filed. House, barn, well, fencing, garden, dairy, henhouse. Then we list what remains to be finished before final proof. Second, we gather witnesses, not just friends, people who bought from you, people who saw you living here, people who can swear the place is being worked. Third, we finish what Greer expects to stay undone. Caleb leaned closer. The north fence. The north fence, garden rows, dairy records, coop repairs, any visible proof that this is not abandoned land. Clara tapped the notice. And we answer this properly before he files a contest. What if he already has? A shadow crossed her face. Then we beat him with evidence. The words sounded braver than she felt. By sunrise, they had a plan. The next days moved hard and fast. Clara rose before light, cooked breakfast, then went straight to the garden. Caleb worked the fields until the sun climbed, then joined her at the fence line. They kept Ruth's ledger on the kitchen table, and every evening Clara wrote what had been done. 3 rows cleared. South bean poles reset. North fence 6 posts replaced. Dairy scrubbed and whitewashed. Hen house door rehung. Egg count 9. Butter churned 2 pounds. It felt strange at first writing proof of ordinary labor, but that was what men like Greer feared most. Not anger, not tears, proof. One morning, Clara took a basket of eggs and fresh butter into Clearwater. Caleb offered to drive her, but she refused. If folks see you doing every errand, they'll say I'm hidden out here. If they see me plain, selling what this homestead produces, they'll remember it. So she went alone, with her bonnet tied firm and Ruth's old basket beside her. Clearwater was not much more than a street, a church, a mercantile, a blacksmith shop, and a land office with a flag that snapped in the wind. But gossip traveled through it faster than fire through dry grass. Clara felt eyes on her the moment she stepped down from the wagon. Mrs. Ada Pike, who ran the mercantile with a face made for judgment and a heart that sometimes overruled it, looked up from stacking calico. Well now, you're the woman staying at Mercer's place. I'm the woman working at Mercer's place, Clara said. Mrs. Pike raised one brow. Clara set the butter crock on the counter. 2 pounds, fresh churned yesterday, eggs gathered this morning, Barrow Creek is producing again. That did more than any defense could have. Mrs. Pike removed the cloth from the crock, smelled the butter, and her expression changed. Ruth Mercer used to bring butter like this. I found her salt measure, Clara said. She had a good hand. Mrs. Pike's face softened. She did. Clara let the silence sit before she spoke again. I'll be bringing more as the hens settle. Mr. Mercer will need proper receipts, dates written clear. For the land office. For the truth, Clara said. Mrs. Pike looked at her more closely then. Silas Greer came asking questions last week. Clara's fingers tightened on the basket handle. What questions? Whether Mercer still lived out there regular, whether the garden had gone under, whether Ruth's death had left him unable to keep the place. The words burned, but Clara kept her chin level. And what did you say? Mrs. Pike straightened a bolt of cloth with unnecessary care. I said Caleb Mercer buys flour, coffee, nails, and lamp oil regular enough for a man living at home, and I said grief is not abandonment. Clara swallowed, thank you. Mrs. Pike wrapped the butter and wrote a receipt in firm ink. You tell Caleb I'll swear to it if asked. Clara left the mercantile with the receipt tucked safely in her reticule, and a little more hope than she had brought in. But hope did not last long. As she passed the land office, she saw Silas Greer through the window. He was speaking with Mr. Toland, the clerk. Greer stood with one hand on the counter, smiling that clean, gentle smile. Mr. Toland nodded too often and looked too nervous. Clara stopped just beyond the window. Greer laid a folded paper on the desk. The clerk glanced toward the street, and for one sharp second his eyes met Clara's through the glass. Then he looked away. Clara knew that look. She had seen it before, just before Red Willow Bend was taken. She entered the office without knocking. Both men turned. Mrs. Whitcomb, Greer said, you do have a habit of appearing where business is being conducted. And you have a habit of conducting business around widowed people's land. Mr. Toland coughed. Mrs. Whitcomb, this is an official office. Then official answers ought to be easy, Clara said. She looked at the folded paper. Has a contest been filed against Caleb Mercer's claim? Toland's mouth opened, but Greer answered first. That would be private business. Clara stepped to the counter. Not if I am employed on the claim and preparing records for final proof. Greer's smile remained, but his eyes sharpened. Hired women do not hold standing in land matters. No, Clara said, but witnesses do, and I am one." The clerk shifted his weight. Greer picked up the folded paper slowly and slid it back inside his coat. "No contest has been filed today," he said. "I merely came to ask questions." "Then ask them in daylight where folks can hear." A faint flush rose at Greer's neck. For the first time, Clara saw the smallest crack in him. Men like Greer liked frightened rooms, quiet counters, lonely claimants, and clerks who spoke in low voices. He did not like a woman making the matter public while customers slowed outside the window to listen. She turned to Mr. Toland. "Mr. Mercer will answer the deficiency notice. He will bring records, receipts, and witnesses. You may expect them soon." Toland nodded. "That would be proper." Greer's voice dropped. "Careful, Mrs. Whitcomb. A person who lost one claim might not be the best guide for saving another." Clara met his eyes. "A person who lost one claim knows exactly where the trap is buried." She left before he could answer. Outside, two men near the blacksmith pretended not to have heard. Mrs. Pike stood in the mercantile doorway holding a bolt of blue cloth, her gaze fixed on Clara with something like respect. Clara climbed into the wagon and drove back toward Barrow Creek. The road home cut between dry grass and cottonwoods. The wheels struck stones. The butter money sat in her pocket beside the receipt. She should have felt stronger. Instead, she felt watched. Halfway home, near the bend where the creek ran shallow, Clara slowed the horses. A piece of paper was nailed to a fence post beside the road. It had not been there that morning. She climbed down, dust rising around her boots, and pulled it free. The paper held only one line, written in a hand she now knew too well. "Some women should learn when land is not theirs to save." Clara stood alone in the road, the horses breathing softly behind her, the Montana wind tugging at the paper in her hand. Then from the cottonwoods came the faint crack of a twig under a boot. She turned. No one stepped out. But Clara knew with a cold certainty that Silas Greer was no longer only circling the homestead. He was circling her. Clara reached Barrow Creek with the warning folded inside her glove. She did not show it to Caleb at first. That surprised even her. All the way home, she told herself she would hand it to him the moment she stepped into the yard. He had a right to know. It was his claim, his fence line, his name sitting under threat at the land office. But when she drove up and saw him near the north fence with his sleeves rolled and a post maul in his hands, something in her paused. Caleb had taken off his hat and hung it on a fence rail. His dark hair was damp from work. The sun burned low behind him, turning the dust around his boots to gold. Each time he drove a post into the earth, the sound carried across the field like a slow, steady heartbeat. He looked alive in a way he had not looked when she first came. Not healed, not whole, but no longer buried standing up. Clara sat on the wagon seat a moment, watching him set another post with careful strength. The Barrow Creek land seemed to gather around him, not as a graveyard now, but as something being reclaimed. She thought of the paper in her glove. Some women should learn when land is not theirs to save. Greer meant to frighten her. He had, but not in the way he hoped. She climbed down from the wagon, took the basket and the receipt from Mrs. Pike, and walked toward the house. Caleb saw her and leaned on the maul. "You were gone a long while." Clearwater had a lot to say. "That town always does. I sold the butter and eggs. Mrs. Pike gave a receipt and said she'll swear you've been buying household goods regular." Caleb's face changed with relief. "Ada Pike said that." "She did, and she said grief is not abandonment." He looked down for a moment, blinking against more than sunlight. Clara moved past him toward the porch. "What else happened?" he asked. She stopped. He knew, not the warning perhaps, but something in her walk, her mouth, the way she held her shoulders. A man who lived with grief learned to read what was not spoken. Clara turned back. "I saw Greer at the land office. He had a paper, but he did not file it." Caleb's hand tightened on the maul. "Why not?" "Because I walked in." For the first time that day, a small grin touched Caleb's mouth. "I imagine he disliked that." "He did." The grin faded, and Clara reached into her glove and drew out the warning. Caleb crossed the yard in 3 strides. He read it once, his face went still, then he read it again, slower. Where was this? Pinned to the fence near the creek bend. Did you see who put it there? No. His jaw worked. He threatened you. He warned me. There's a difference. Not enough of one. Clara looked toward the north fence. He wants us angry. Angry people make mistakes. Caleb folded the paper with great care, too much care. It told her how hard he was holding himself back. I should ride into Clearwater tonight. And do what? Find him. Then he tells the county you came raging into town over a scrap of paper no one saw him write. He becomes the respectable man. You become the grieving widower unfit to hold land. Caleb's eyes flashed. So we do nothing. No, Clara said. We do the thing he fears. We keep proving the claim. The wind moved between them, lifting the edge of her bonnet ribbon. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. You're not alone in this, he said. The words came quietly. They should not have unsettled her, but they did. Clara turned toward the porch before her face could soften. Then come eat before the beans burn. That evening, supper tasted of smoke and worry. Caleb ate little. Clara pretended not to notice. Outside, the repaired fence line stood dark against the last light. Inside, Ruth's ledger lay open beside the lamp, waiting for another entry. After dishes, Clara wrote, butter and eggs sold in Clearwater. Receipt from A. Pike, witness willing, Greer present at land office. No filing confirmed. She did not write about the warning, not in Ruth's ledger. That book was for proof, not fear. Caleb watched the pen move. You write like you're laying stones, he said. I am. For what? A wall he can't push through. He took the receipt and studied Mrs. Pike's careful script. Ruth used to say records were a woman's fence. Men noticed rails and wire. She noticed dates, jars, seed orders, bills, who came by, who borrowed what. She was right. Caleb's thumb brushed the edge of the paper. I used to tease her for writing down every little thing. Clara looked at Ruth's neat pages. She may yet have the last word. Caleb was quiet after that. The next morning brought trouble wearing a sunbonnet. Mrs. Ada Pike arrived just after breakfast in a buckboard with 2 sacks of flour, a bundle of cloth, and a face full of purpose. Beside her sat Mrs. Lottie Henshaw from the church, stiff-backed and narrow-eyed. Clara saw them through the kitchen window and set down the biscuit dough. Caleb came from the barn, wiping his hands. Morning, ladies. Mrs. Pike nodded. Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Henshaw looked past him, straight at Clara. We came to call. Clara stepped onto the porch. That is kind. It is necessary, Mrs. Henshaw said. Ada Pike gave her a warning glance, but Lottie Henshaw had already gathered too much righteousness to set it down. A widower and a widow alone on a homestead makes talk, Mrs. Henshaw said, especially when the woman has no kin present. Caleb's face darkened. Clara touched the porch rail before he could speak. I have work present, Mrs. Henshaw. That has been enough kin for many a widow. The woman's lips pressed thin. Respectability is not a small matter. No, Clara agreed. Neither is survival. Mrs. Pike cleared her throat. I brought flour and cloth on credit against future butter, not a sermon. I brought concern, Mrs. Henshaw said. Caleb stepped forward. Mrs. Whitcomb has conducted herself with nothing but dignity in this house. That may be so, Mrs. Henshaw replied, but appearances matter. Clara felt the old anger rise, the same anger she had swallowed when people whispered about her after Thomas died, as if widowhood were a stain that spread if a woman worked too close to a man. She came down one porch step. Then let us speak of appearances. Mr. Greer appeared at the land office asking after this claim. He appeared in town asking whether Mr. Mercer's grief made him unfit. A warning appeared on the creek fence after I challenged him, yet the concern brought to this porch is whether I bake bread in a widower's kitchen for wages. Mrs. Henshaw blinked. Mrs. Pike looked sharply at Clara. A warning. Caleb held out the folded paper. Ada read it and her mouth tightened. Lottie Henshaw read it next. Some of the sternness slipped from her face. "Well," she said, quieter now, "that is ugly." "It is familiar," Clara said. "Men like Greer count on decent people watching the wrong thing." Mrs. Pike folded the paper and handed it back. "What do you need?" The question surprised Clara. It surprised Caleb too. Clara looked from one woman to the other. She had expected judgment. She had prepared for it. Help was harder to receive. "Witnesses," she said. "Receipts. Honest eyes. Anyone who saw the place worked or bought goods from it or knows Mr. Mercer has resided here steady. And we need people to remember Ruth's records are not dead paper. They show this was always a real homestead." Mrs. Henshaw glanced toward the garden, where 3 clean rows now stood in the morning light. "Ruth and I planted those first rose cuttings," she said softly. Caleb looked at her. "I didn't know that." She cried because the wind broke one, then laughed because the other took root. Mrs. Henshaw's chin trembled, and she looked away as if annoyed by her own tenderness. "I can speak to the early improvements. I was here the week after the well was finished." Clara felt the air shift. Ada Pike nodded. "I'll gather receipts from the mercantile, flour, lamp oil, nails, seed, anything in Caleb's name." "And I," Mrs. Henshaw said, recovering her firm tone, "will speak to the church ladies." Caleb looked wary. Mrs. Henshaw lifted her chin. "Not about scandal, about testimony." Clara almost smiled. By the time the women left, the homestead felt less isolated. The road to town no longer seemed like a path Greer owned. It seemed perhaps like a line along which help might come. After they drove off, Caleb stood beside Clara near the porch. "You turned a scolding into an army," he said. "Not an army, just women who know where the records are kept." This time Caleb laughed fully. The sound reached the roses. And for one brief moment, Barrow Creek felt almost light. If you believe one brave truth can change the way people see a widow, give this story a little kindness before we go on, because the hardest test for Clara was still waiting down the road. That test came 3 days later. By then the north fence was nearly finished. Clara had the dairy sweet again. The hens were laying more than a dozen eggs a day. 2 neighbors had promised statements. Mrs. Pike had sent a packet of receipts. Mrs. Henshaw had delivered, without apology, a list of 6 churchwomen willing to testify that Caleb Mercer had never abandoned his home. It was near sundown when a rider came fast from Clearwater. The horse was lathered. The rider was Mr. Toland's young assistant from the land office, a freckled boy named Henry Vale who could not have been more than 17. Caleb met him at the yard gate. Henry slid down, breathing hard. "Mr. Mercer," he said, holding out an envelope, "this was entered today." Clara came from the garden with dirt on her skirt and a basket in her hand. She knew before Caleb opened it. Some papers had a weight even before the words were read. Caleb unfolded the notice. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. Clara watched the color drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her. Silas Greer had filed a formal contest against Barrow Creek. But not only against the land. At the bottom, in careful language, he claimed Caleb Mercer had brought in Clara Whitcomb to create false improvements after lawful deficiency, and that her presence on the claim was improper, misleading, and proof that the homestead had not been maintained by its owner. Clara read the line twice. Greer was not merely trying to take Caleb's land now. He was trying to turn Clara's help into the weapon that would destroy it. The contest notice lay on the kitchen table like a live coal. Caleb had read it 3 times. Clara had read it twice more. Neither reading made the words kinder. Silas Greer had done what Clara feared most. He had not only challenged the Barrow Creek claim, he had twisted her work into suspicion. Every repaired fence, every garden row, every crock of butter, every witness from town now carried a shadow because Greer claimed it had been done in haste to cover neglect. Worse, he had used her name. Clara Whitcomb, previously unsuccessful claimant at Red Willow Bend, presently employed in the Mercer household, appears to have directed improvements for the purpose of defeating lawful review. The sentence sat in Clara's mind like a thorn. Previously unsuccessful claimant. Not robbed widow, not woman who had been trapped by a land speculator, not homesteader who had built a place with her hands and watched it taken by ink. Unsuccessful. That was the cruelty of official words. They could make suffering sound like failure. Caleb stood by the stove, both hands gripping the back of a chair. He's calling you a liar. He's calling me useful, Clara said. That is what frightens him. This is my fault. No. I let the notice sit. I let the place fall. I let Ruth's ledger stay shut. Now he's dragging your name through it because you tried to help me. Clara looked up at him. A line of lamplight crossed his face. He looked worn, angry, and ashamed all at once. She had seen men rage when threatened. She had seen men fold. Caleb did neither. He stood there taking the blame into himself like a man used to carrying more than his share. She softened, though her voice stayed firm. Mr. Mercer, Greer did not become a thief because you grieved your wife. He was one before he rode up your lane. Caleb turned away. Still, you should not have to stand in front of him again. That is exactly where I need to stand. He faced her, Clara. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. The sound of it moved through the room quietly, yet it seemed to touch every wall. She held still. Caleb heard it too. His expression changed, as if he had stepped over a line without meaning to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara looked back at the notice. The hearing is in 9 days. At Clearwater. At the land office. Caleb gave a bitter breath. In Toland's office, where Greer already whispers. Then we make sure he cannot whisper. We bring so many voices the room has no corner left for secrets. The next morning, Barrow Creek turned into a place of preparation. Caleb rode to the Harlan place for witness statements. Clara took Ruth's ledger, Mrs. Pike's receipts, and a clean stack of paper to the kitchen table. She wrote until her fingers cramped. Dates of improvements. Names of witnesses. Produce sold. Repairs completed before Greer's filing. Repairs completed after deficiency notice. Evidence of residence. Evidence of cultivation. Evidence that Clara was hired openly for wages. Not hidden, not unlawful, not improper. She wrote the truth in plain words, because plain truth had saved many people who could not afford fancy speech. By noon, Mrs. Pike arrived with more receipts and a jar of pickled beets for supper. She did not ask if she was welcome. She walked straight into the kitchen, untied her bonnet, and laid the papers beside the ledger. I found purchases going back 18 months, she said. Coffee, flour, lamp oil, boot nails, sugar, seeds, salt, 2 shovel handles, and a bolt of mourning cloth. Clara touched the last receipt with care. For Ruth. Mrs. Pike nodded. For the funeral. The room quieted. Ada Pike had a sharp tongue, but she folded that receipt gently. It proves he was here, she said, even when he wished he was. Clara nodded. Near mid-afternoon, Mrs. Henshaw came with 2 church women and a basket of food wrapped in cloth. By evening, old Mr. Dawes from the blacksmith shop arrived to swear Caleb had ordered hinge straps for the henhouse before Greer's contest. Then came Jeb Turner, who had helped mend the south fence the year before, and remembered the exact date because his mule kicked him that same day. For the first time since Clara came to Barrow Creek, the Mercer house held more voices than ghosts. Caleb returned near dark with 3 written statements, and a look on his face that Clara could not read. He stood in the doorway watching the women sort receipts, old Dawes drink coffee, and Jeb Turner tell Mrs. Henshaw for the second time about the mule. Ruth's house was full. Not loud, not merry exactly, but alive. Clara saw Caleb's throat move. He stepped back outside before anyone could notice. A few minutes later, Clara followed with a lantern. She found him at the edge of the garden near Ruth's roses. The sky was purple over the fields. The first stars had begun to show. Caleb stood with his hat in his hand, looking at the house where lamplight glowed in every window. She would have liked this, he said. Ruth. He nodded. She was always filling the place. Neighbors, children, women from church, hands from the next spread over. I used to complain I could never find a quiet chair. And now. He gave a faint smile that hurt to see. Now I'd give much to hear her tell me to fetch another chair. Clara stood beside him, the lantern flame moving in the wind. Inside, someone laughed softly. Jeb, probably. The sound passed through the window and faded into the dusk. Caleb looked down at the roses. I thought keeping her things untouched was honoring her. Sometimes it is. And sometimes it keeps the dead from becoming memory, because they stay a wound instead. He looked at Clara then. She feared she had said too much, but Caleb did not turn away. You learned that with Thomas. Yes. What helped? Clara thought of Red Willow Bend, the cabin empty after the fever, Thomas's coat hanging on a peg, the pipe she could not throw away, the bed she stopped sleeping in because his side stayed too cold. Leaving did not help, she said. I had no choice in that, but later, when I finally opened his watch and let it tick again, I understood something. What? That silence is not the same as keeping faith. Caleb's eyes stayed on hers. The lantern trembled between them. For one moment the world grew small. Just the garden, the roses, the man who had lost his wife, and the woman who had lost everything that carried her husband's name. Clara felt the pull of it, dangerous and gentle. Then Mrs. Henshaw called from the house. Mrs. Whitcomb, where do you keep the clean ink bottle? Clara stepped back too quickly. In the upper cupboard, she called. Caleb put his hat on and looked toward the fields. I'll check the horses. But neither of them moved for several seconds. The hearing drew closer. Each day brought more proof, and each proof seemed to stir Greer's anger from a distance. A gate latch was found cut, though no stock escaped. A man no one knew asked questions at the blacksmith about Caleb's drinking, though Caleb hardly touched liquor. One of Mrs. Pike's receipts went missing from the mercantile counter, then turned up torn behind a flour barrel. Greer did not need to show his face. His shadow traveled ahead of him. On the fourth day before the hearing, Henry Vale, the young land office assistant, came to Barrow Creek again. This time he arrived at dusk, not on official business but shaking with fear. Caleb brought him into the kitchen while Clara poured coffee. Henry would not sit at first. He kept twisting his cap in his hands. I shouldn't be here, he said. Then say what brought you, Caleb replied. Henry looked toward Clara. Mr. Greer knows you're gathering witnesses. He says it won't matter. Clara set the coffee down. Why? The boy swallowed. He has a sworn statement. Says Mr. Mercer abandoned the homestead for weeks at a time after Mrs. Mercer died. Says the house was empty and the fields unused. Caleb frowned. From who? Henry's eyes flicked toward the window. Elias Boone. Caleb went still. Clara saw the name strike him harder than the contest notice had. Who is Elias Boone? She asked. Caleb's face closed. My hired hand before Ruth died. Where is he now? Gone. Henry's voice dropped. He's back in Clearwater, came in yesterday with Mr. Greer. Caleb turned away, but not before Clara saw the pain in his eyes. There was more here than a hired hand. What does Boone have against you? Clara asked. Caleb did not answer. Henry looked between them, then spoke softly. Mr. Greer says Boone can prove Mr. Mercer left the claim unattended. Says he has personal knowledge. Clara felt the careful wall of proof tremble. Witnesses from town could help. Receipts could help. Ruth's ledger could help. But a former hired hand with inside knowledge could poison everything if his lies sounded close enough to truth. Caleb gripped the edge of the table. Boone won't stop at land, he said. Clara stepped closer. What do you mean? Caleb's voice was low. The night Ruth took fever, Boone was supposed to ride for the doctor. He never came back. He took my spare horse and half a month's pay from the tin by the stove. By the time I got help, it was too late. The kitchen fell silent. Even Henry stopped twisting his cap. Clara looked at Caleb and saw a wound she had not known he carried. Not just grief, not just guilt. Betrayal. Caleb looked toward the dark window. I never told folks, didn't see the use. Ruth was gone, the baby was gone, Boone was gone, what would talk change? Clara's heart sank. Greer had found not merely a witness, but the one man Caleb could barely face. Henry whispered, "There's more." Caleb looked at him. The boy reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded scrap. "I copied this from Mr. Greer's desk when Mr. Tolan stepped out. I know I shouldn't have, but I heard them laughing." Clara took the scrap. On it was a short line in Greer's hand. "Press Mercer on the wife. He will break before he testifies." Clara looked up slowly. Caleb's face had gone pale. The hearing was no longer only about land. Silas Greer had found the deepest grave at Barrow Creek, and he meant to dig it open in public. Caleb did not speak after Henry Vale left. The boy rode back toward Clearwater with his shoulders hunched and his hat pulled low, carrying more fear than any 17-year-old ought to carry. Clara watched him disappear into the purple dusk, then turned toward the kitchen where Caleb stood over Greer's copied note. "Press Mercer on the wife. He will break before he testifies." The words had done what Greer intended, at least for a moment. They had emptied Caleb's face. Mrs. Pike had gone home before sunset. Mrs. Henshaw and the church women had left even earlier, promising to return the morning before the hearing. Now the house belonged again to Clara, Caleb, and the quiet that came after a wound was touched. Caleb picked up the note and folded it once. Then again, until it was small enough to vanish in his fist. "He is right," Caleb said. Clara stood near the stove. "No. You don't know. I know men like Greer make their strength out of other people, believing they are already beaten." Caleb let out a hard breath. "You did not see her that night." The words were not loud, but they struck the room with force. Clara did not move. Caleb turned from the table and walked to the window. Night had gathered beyond the glass. His reflection floated there, dim and broken by lamplight. "Ruth had been hurting since morning," he said. "She kept saying it was natural. Women knew such things," she said. "She smiled at me between pains because she saw I was scared and she did not want to add my fear to her own." His voice grew thin at the edges. "Boone was in the barn. I told him to saddle up and ride for Doc Haverly. The road was muddy from rain, but passable. He said he would go. I gave him money from the tin for the doctor's fee and told him to take the gray horse because she was fastest." Clara listened without interruption. The wind pressed softly against the walls. "I waited," Caleb said. "Ruth waited. The pains got worse. Night came. No Boone, no doctor. By midnight I knew something was wrong, but I could not leave her. She gripped my sleeve so hard she tore it, kept asking if the doctor was close." His hand rose to his left wrist, as if he still felt the torn cloth there. "I lied. I told her yes." Clara's eyes stung. He swallowed. "Near dawn, she stopped asking. By the time I rode myself, Boone was gone. The gray horse was found 2 days later, half lame, at a trading post south of Clearwater. The money was gone. Boone was gone, and Ruth was buried before the week ended." The kitchen seemed smaller around them. Clara had known childbirth and fever took women on the frontier. Everyone knew it, but there was a special cruelty in knowing help had been promised and stolen. "I should have gone myself," Caleb said. "You could not leave her. I should have carried her. In that rain, in that pain. I should have known Boone would run." Clara came slowly to the table and rested one hand on the chair back. "Guilt is a wicked liar, Caleb. It speaks and should have because it cannot change what was." He turned from the window then. His eyes were wet, but no tears had fallen. Some men spent years learning how not to let them. "If Greer asks me about Ruth in that room, I will see it again, all of it, and Boone will sit there breathing after what he did. Then we prepare you." "For what? To speak calmly while the man who left her to die calls me unfit. To tell the truth before he can shape it." Caleb shook his head. "Truth did not save her." "No," Clara said softly, "but it may save what she built." That reached him. He looked toward Ruth's ledger on the table, the brown cover worn at the corners from her hands. Clara saw his anger shift, not vanish, but find direction. The next days became less about fence posts and more about courage. Clara made Caleb speak the story again the following morning, not because she was cruel, but because silence had made the memory sharper than any blade. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee cooling between them, and she asked questions the way Greer might ask, only without poison. What time did Ruth first fall ill? Near sunup. Who was present? Me, Boone, Ruth. What did you instruct Boone to do? Ride for Doc Haverly. What did you give him? Money and the gray horse. Did he return? No. Each answer cost him less the third time than the first. By the fifth time, his voice no longer shook. By the seventh, he could say Ruth's name without looking away. That evening, Clara found him in the barn oiling harness. The bay horse stood quiet in the stall, ears flicking at flies. Dust hung in a shaft of low sunlight from the loft window. Caleb did not look up when she entered. I remembered something, he said. What? Boone cut his hand on the saddle buckle before he left that night, bled on the gray mare's neck. I remember because Ruth heard him curse and told me not to let him speak foul with a child coming into the house. A tender smile flickered, then faded. Clara stepped closer. Does anyone know where the gray mare went after she was found? I sold her the next spring, to Ed Mallory north of town. Would he remember the blood mark? Maybe not, but he might remember the lame leg, might remember buying her cheap because she'd been run hard and left. Then we asked him. Caleb nodded. And Doc Haverly, Clara added. He can swear Boone never came. He moved to Helena last year. Can he be written to? Caleb looked at her. The hearing is in 3 days. Then we send Henry. So they did. Henry Vale, pale but willing, rode with a letter that night. He took Caleb's written account and Clara's careful questions, bound in twine and sealed with wax from Ruth's old writing box. Clara pressed 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth into the boy's hand before he left. Ride careful, she said. Henry nodded. I want Mr. Greer stopped. Wanting is not enough, Clara told him. Bring back proof. He swallowed and rode into the dark. The morning before the hearing, Barrow Creek filled with wagons. Mrs. Pike came first, carrying receipts, ledgers, and a hard look that promised no mercy for foolish men. Mrs. Henshaw came next with 3 churchwomen and a basket of sandwiches no one asked for but everyone ate. Jeb Turner arrived on his mule, which he loudly claimed was a better witness than half the men in Clearwater. Old Dawes brought a statement about iron hinges and stayed to mend a loose stove handle because he could not sit still. And then Ed Mallory came. He was a broad man with a beard gone white at the chin. He stood in the yard turning his hat in his hands. I heard you needed word on a gray mare, he said. Caleb stepped from the porch. I did. Caleb's face tightened. Will you swear to it? Mallory nodded. And there's more. I saw Elias Boone 2 days after Ruth died. South Road, had mud to his knees and money enough to drink loud. Caleb closed his eyes. Clara felt the whole yard go quiet. Mallory's voice lowered. I should have said then. I knew something was wrong, but folks were grieving and I didn't want to stir pain. Caleb opened his eyes. Pain stirs whether folks help it or not. Mallory nodded, ashamed. I'll say it now. That night the house was full again, but Clara felt the trial waiting over them like weather. After everyone left, she remained at the table sorting papers into order. Caleb sat across from her, Ruth's ledger open beneath his hand. You should rest, he said. So should you. Can't. Neither can I. A small smile passed between them. He looked down at the ledger. I used to think Ruth's writing kept me tied to the worst day. Now it feels like she left us a lantern. She did. Caleb touched the page gently, and you knew how to light it. Clara's breath caught. She busied herself stacking Mrs. Pike's receipts. Anyone could have done this. No, he said, they could not. She kept her eyes down. Caleb's voice softened. You came here for wages, Clara. You owe this place nothing. She looked at him then. I know what it is to stand alone while a man with clean hands takes everything. I will not watch it happen twice. You are not standing alone this time. There it was again, that dangerous kindness. The lamp flame moved. Outside, a horse shifted. The night held its breath. Caleb reached across the table, not touching her, only turning Thomas's old watch where it lay beside her papers. She had taken it from her trunk that morning and wound it for the first time in months. Its ticking was soft but steady. "You opened it," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Clara looked at the watch. The brass was worn where Thomas's thumb had rubbed it smooth. "Because tomorrow is not only about what was taken from me, it is about what I still know." Caleb nodded slowly. For a moment his hand remained near hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it, far enough that no promise was made. That was good. Promises before a hearing were dangerous. Hope before justice could cut deep. At dawn, they rode to Clearwater in 3 wagons. Clara wore her black dress, clean and plain. Caleb wore his best coat, though it fit him as if he had last worn it at Ruth's funeral. Mrs. Pike carried the receipts in a tin box. Mrs. Henshaw carried Ruth's ledger wrapped in blue cloth. Jeb Turner brought his mule because he said the animal deserved to see government foolishness up close. The land office was already crowded when they arrived. Silas Greer stood near the clerk's counter with Elias Boone beside him. Boone was thinner than Clara expected, with restless eyes and a mouth that looked used to excuses. When Caleb saw him, the air between the two men seemed to harden. Greer smiled. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, how fine that you brought half the town for a simple matter of law." Clara stepped forward with Ruth's ledger in her arms. "Law does better in a full room," she said. "Less room for tricks." A murmur moved through the crowd. Greer's smile stayed fixed, but Clara saw his hand tighten around his cane. The hearing began with Mr. Toland clearing his throat and reading the contest aloud. His voice shook once when he reached Clara's name. She stood still through it, though every word was meant to shame her. Then Greer called Elias Boone. Boone took his place and swore to tell the truth without looking at Caleb. Greer's questions came smooth. Was the homestead neglected? Yes. Was Mr. Mercer often absent? Yes. Were improvements made only after Clara Whitcomb arrived? Most of them. Did Mrs. Whitcomb direct the work? She did. Greer looked toward the room with practiced sorrow. And in your opinion, was Barrow Creek a properly maintained claim before her arrival? Boone lowered his eyes. No, sir. A ripple moved through the office. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. Greer turned, gentle as a preacher. Mr. Boone, one final matter. Why did you leave Mr. Mercer's employ? Boone swallowed. Caleb's hands closed into fists. Greer looked straight at Caleb as he asked it. Was it not because Mr. Mercer, in his grief and temper after his wife's passing, accused you unfairly and drove you from the property? Caleb took one step forward before he could stop himself. The room stirred. Clara caught his sleeve. Not hard, just enough. Caleb looked down at her hand, then at her face. She whispered, "Tell the truth first." He drew one breath, then another. And while every person in the land office watched, Caleb Mercer stepped into the center of the room and faced the man who had abandoned Ruth in her hour of need. Caleb Mercer stood in the center of the Clearwater land office, with the whole room watching him. For a moment, he did not look like a man defending acreage. He looked like a man standing at the edge of the worst night of his life, forced to step back into it with his hat in his hands and his heart uncovered. Elias Boone shifted near Silas Greer. His eyes slid toward the door, then toward the windows, as if he had just remembered that lies felt lighter when spoken in private. Greer's smile remained calm. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "this proceeding has rules." "Then let the rules hear all of it," Caleb replied. Mr. Toland, pale behind the counter, cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, you may answer the statement made by the witness." Caleb nodded once. Clara still held Ruth's ledger wrapped in blue cloth. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. Caleb had practiced this. He had spoken the words at the kitchen table in the barn beside the roses, but practice was not the same as saying them in front of Boone. He turned toward the room. Elias Boone left my employ the night my wife died, Caleb said. A hush fell so heavy that the scratch of Mr. Toland's pen sounded loud. Boone's face tightened. That ain't true the way he means it. Caleb kept his eyes forward. Ruth took fever during childbirth. I sent Boone for Doc Haverly. I gave him money for the doctor and told him to take my gray mare. He said he would ride straight. Mrs. Henshaw pressed one hand to her chest. Caleb's voice roughened, but he held it steady. He did not come back. Boone stepped forward. Road was washed out. No, Caleb said. It was muddy, not washed out. Greer lifted a hand. This is a grief-struck accusation from years ago. It has no bearing on the present condition of the claim. It has bearing on your witness, Clara said. Greer's eyes cut toward her. Mrs. Whitcomb, you are not presiding here. No, she said, but I am listening. A low murmur passed through the office. Someone near the back gave a soft sound that might have been approval. Mrs. Pike did not hide her smile. Mr. Toland swallowed. Let Mr. Mercer finish. Caleb turned to Boone fully now. You took the money, you took the mare. You never reached the doctor. 2 days later, the horse was found south of Clearwater, lame and spent. You were seen on the south road with coin enough to drink. And now you stand here under oath telling folks I drove you off unfairly. Boone's mouth opened, but no clean words came out. Greer's cane tapped once against the floor. Where is your proof? That was when Clara stepped forward. She unwrapped Ruth's ledger from the blue cloth and set it gently on the counter. This ledger records the household money kept at Barrow Creek. Ruth Mercer wrote in it until her final day. After that, Mr. Mercer wrote little because grief does that to a hand. But the entries before her passing show the wage tin, doctor money, livestock, and the gray mare. She opened to a marked page. Mr. Toland leaned over it. Clara continued, Mr. Mercer has sworn that money was removed on the night Boone rode. The doctor did not arrive. We sent for his statement. Greer smiled faintly. A doctor in Helena will hardly ride through that door. No, Clara said, but his letter did. The door opened. Henry Vale stepped in, red-faced from hard riding, dust on his coat, and triumph shining through his fear. In his hand was an envelope sealed in dark wax. Clara felt a breath move through the whole room. Henry crossed to Mr. Toland and handed it over. From Dr. Abel Haverly of Helena, he said, delivered by stage to Mill Creek, then by me. Mr. Toland opened it with trembling fingers. Greer's smile vanished for half a second. It was enough. Toland read aloud. Dr. Haverly stated that no messenger from Barrow Creek came for him on the night Ruth Mercer died. He further stated that the road, though poor from rain, had been traveled by another rancher that same evening. He remembered because the rancher reached him with a broken arm before midnight. The room stirred. Boone wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Greer stepped closer. This is old sorrow, not land proof. Mrs. Pike lifted her tin box. Then let us speak of land proof. She came forward like a woman marching into church late and daring anyone to comment. She set receipts on the counter, each tied in packets. Mercantile purchases, she said. 18 months of them. Food, lamp oil, seed, nails, tools. A man not residing on his claim does not buy lamp oil steady, nor flour in household measure, nor seed for land he has abandoned. Greer's jaw set. Mrs. Henshaw moved next, carrying her written statement. I was present when Ruth Mercer planted the first roses and when the well was finished. I returned after Mrs. Whitcomb's arrival and saw the garden being restored from existing rows, not invented fresh to deceive anyone. The bones of Ruth's work remained. Old Dawes came forward with his statement about hinge straps and henhouse repairs. Jeb Turner swore to the south fence and added, against advice, that his mule had more honesty than Elias Boone. Mr. Toland told him to keep to facts. Jeb said that was one. A nervous laugh broke through the room. For the first time all morning, Caleb's shoulders eased. But Clara knew Greer had not spent years stealing land by losing his temper at the first turn. He waited until the witnesses had spoken. Then he stepped into the center of the room with a sorrowful face. No one disputes that work has been done recently, he said. The question is whether Mr. Mercer maintained the claim as required, or whether Mrs. Whitcomb, a woman with painful history in such matters, arrived to create the appearance of compliance after deficiency was noted. He turned toward Clara. I sympathize with widows, truly, but sympathy cannot become law. Mrs. Whitcomb lost her own claim because she failed to meet the requirements. Now she seeks to repair that humiliation by directing another claimant, perhaps beyond what is proper. It is touching, but it is not proof. The words struck their intended mark. Clara felt heat rise in her face, not shame, anger. Greer addressed cruelty as pity again. Caleb moved beside her, but she lifted one hand slightly. No, this was hers. Clara stepped forward. Her black dress was plain, her gloves were mended. Dust marked the hem from the wagon road. She was no lawyer, no official, no lady with family money behind her. But she had stood once in such a room and lost, because she did not know how to speak the language of proof. This time she did. Mr. Greer is right about one thing, she said. I lost my claim. The room quieted. I lost it because my husband died, because I was alone, because I did not know which papers mattered until a man who did know used them against me. That man was Mr. Greer. Greer's mouth tightened. This is irrelevant. No, Clara said. It is the reason I can read his method as plain as a trail in snow. A few people leaned closer. Clara looked toward Mr. Toland. Greer claims recent improvements are false. They are not. They are recovery. A neglected garden is not proof land was never cultivated. The old rows remain. The old plantings remain. The ledger proves Ruth Mercer established them years ago. Witnesses prove Mr. Mercer remained in residence. Receipts prove household use. Sales from this season prove production. The repairs we made were not trickery. They were maintenance brought current before final proof, and before Mr. Greer filed his contest. She turned a page in Ruth's ledger. Here are Ruth Mercer's first plantings. Here are seed purchases. Here is the well. Here is the barn raising. Here are fence repairs. Here are butter sales from before her death. Here are Mrs. Pike's receipts after. Here are current egg and butter sales, if Mr. Greer wishes to say the homestead was never real. He must argue against a dead woman's handwriting, half a town's memory, and the living work standing in plain sight on Barrow Creek. The room held still. Clara turned to Boone. And if he wishes to rest his case on Elias Boone, then let the room remember that Boone's own history at Barrow Creek began with a promise to fetch help and ended with a stolen horse, missing money, and a buried woman. Boone's face went gray. Greer stepped in quickly. Slander. Henry Vale, still near the door, spoke before fear could stop him. I heard Mr. Greer say Mr. Mercer would break if pressed about his wife. Every head turned. Greer froze. Mr. Toland stared at the boy. Henry. Henry's voice shook, but he went on. I copied the note from Mr. Greer's desk. I know I shouldn't have, but he meant to use Mrs. Mercer's death to unsettle Mr. Mercer, not to prove the claim. Clara drew the copied note from her reticule and laid it on the counter. Press Mercer on the wife. He will break before he testifies. No one spoke. Even the street outside seemed quiet. Greer's face changed then, not much but enough. The soft mask slipped, and for a second Clara saw the carrion hunger beneath. You foolish boy, Greer said. Mr. Toland stood straighter. Mr. Greer. The warning in his voice surprised everyone, perhaps even himself. Greer recovered quickly. This proceeding has become emotional theater. No, Mrs. Pike said from the side. It became honest despite you. A stronger murmur rose. Mr. Toland gathered the papers with shaking hands. He looked at the ledger, the receipts, the doctor's letter, the witness statements, the copied note, and then at Caleb. I will forward this evidence with recommendation that the contest be denied pending final proof review, he said. Given the testimony presented, there is insufficient basis to forfeit the claim at this time. Caleb closed his eyes. Clara gripped the edge of the counter. It was not full victory yet, not a deed, not safety forever. But it was a door Greer had failed to close. Toland continued, his voice stronger. Mr. Mercer will be permitted to submit final proof with witnesses within the required period. Greer's cane struck the floor. You will regret bending to a room full of sentiment. Mr. Toland looked at him, pale but firm. I am bending to records. The words landed hard and clean. The room broke into low talk. Mrs. Henshaw wept without admitting it. Jeb Turner slapped Caleb on the back so hard Caleb nearly stumbled. Henry Vale stood near the door looking as if he might faint from bravery. Clara stepped outside for air. The sun had moved west. Clearwater's main street lay bright with dust. Horses stood tied at the rail. Somewhere a hammer rang from the blacksmith shop. She pressed one hand to her chest and breathed. They had won the day. But her hand trembled. A moment later, Caleb came out behind her. Clara. She turned. He stood on the boardwalk, holding Ruth's ledger against his coat. You saved it, he said. No, she answered, not yet. You saved me in there. That she could not answer. His eyes searched her face, full of gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them had dared name. Then the land office door opened behind him. Silas Greer stepped out. His face was calm again, but his eyes were not. He passed them without his smile and stopped beside his horse. This county has a short memory, he said softly. Records burn, witnesses leave, widows move on. Caleb took one step toward him. Clara caught his sleeve again. Greer mounted and looked down at her. You should have stayed landless, Mrs. Whitcomb. Then he rode away in a trail of dust. The victory in Clara's chest turned cold. If this moment made you want to see justice done without hatred, stay close, because some men do not stop when they lose in daylight. They wait for dark. And that night, long after the wagons returned to Barrow Creek, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. Smoke has a voice of its own. It does not shout at first. It whispers. It slips under a door, curls through a crack, touches the throat before the mind understands danger. Clara woke coughing. For one confused second, she thought she was back at Red Willow Bend on the winter night Thomas burned brush too close to the cabin. Then she saw the ceiling of the little back room, the pale curtain, the trunk at the foot of the bed, and a gray veil moving where clean air should have been. Smoke. She threw off the quilt and ran to the hall. Caleb. The house was dark except for a dull orange pulse beyond the kitchen window. Not the stove, not the lamp. Outside. Caleb's door flew open. He came out barefoot, pulling on his coat. What is it? Fire. He did not ask where, he ran. Clara grabbed her shawl and followed him through the kitchen. When Caleb opened the back door, heat and smoke struck them together. The north side of the barn glowed. Flames climbed the dry hay stacked under the lean-to, licking up the boards with hungry light. The horses screamed inside, hooves hammering against stalls. Sparks lifted into the night and spun toward the chicken coop and the garden fence. For a moment, Clara stood frozen. Fire could take a homestead faster than law. Then Caleb was moving. Get water from the well. He ran toward the barn, coughing as smoke wrapped around him. Clara seized 2 buckets from the porch and pumped until cold water splashed over her hands. The handle shrieked with every pull. She carried the buckets as fast as she could, water slapping against her skirt, and threw them at the burning hay. The flames hissed, then rose again. Caleb dragged the barn door open. A wall of smoke rolled out. The bay horse lunged, wild-eyed, pulling at its rope. Caleb disappeared inside. Caleb, Clara cried. No answer came, only the crack of burning wood. She ran back to the well. Bucket after bucket, breath after breath, the night turned red around her. The first horse burst from the barn with Caleb at its shoulder. He slapped it toward the open yard and plunged back inside before Clara could stop him. The second horse came out alone, rope trailing, eyes white with terror. Then the roof beam above the lean-to groaned. Clara dropped the bucket and ran to the barn door. Caleb. He appeared through the smoke, bent low, half carrying a saddle and Ruth's old tack box under one arm. Behind him, flame crawled along the wall toward the loft. Leave it, Clara shouted. He stumbled. She caught his sleeve and pulled with all her strength. Together they fell backward into the dirt just as a burning piece of board crashed down where he had stood. For a few seconds, neither moved. Caleb coughed hard, one hand pressed to the ground. Clara's eyes streamed from smoke. Her palms stung. The fire roared over them, throwing heat against their faces. Then Caleb looked at the tack box in his arms. Clara understood. Ruth. He had gone back for something of Ruth's. Her anger softened before it could form. The fire was too strong on the north wall now, but the main barn might yet be saved if they stopped it from spreading. Clara tore off her shawl, soaked it in the water trough, and beat at the sparks jumping toward the coop. Caleb hauled hay bales away from the lean-to, coughing and staggering but refusing to slow. A gunshot cracked through the night. No, not a gunshot. A heated nail popping from a board. The sound still sent fear through Clara's bones. Lights appeared on the distant road. At first she thought the flames were tricking her. Then she heard wheels, horses, voices. Mercer. It was Jeb Turner standing in a wagon, driving like the devil was pulling behind him. Mrs. Pike's buckboard followed. Then old Dawes. Then the Harlans from the South Ridge. More lanterns came bobbing through the dark, one after another, until the lane looked like a trail of stars rushing toward Barrow Creek. The county had not forgotten. Men formed a line from the well. Women carried wet quilts. Mrs. Henshaw, with her bonnet tied crooked and her face pale but fierce, took charge of moving the hens before smoke choked them. Mrs. Pike shoved a bucket into Henry Vale's hands and told him bravery was not finished after one hearing. They fought the fire until dawn. By first light, the lean-to was gone. One side of the barn stood blackened, but the main frame remained. The horses lived. The coop lived. The house lived. Ruth's roses by the porch were singed along the outer leaves, but the roots had not burned. Clara stood in the yard with soot on her face and her dress streaked with ash, watching the last smoke rise into the morning. Caleb sat on an overturned bucket, Ruth's tack box at his feet. One of his hands was wrapped in cloth where a hot rope had burned him. He looked hollow with exhaustion. No one spoke of who had set the fire. Not at first. They all knew. But knowing and proving were different countries. Jeb Turner came from behind the barn, carrying a half-burned scrap of burlap pinched between two sticks. Found this near the hay, he said. Clara stepped closer. The burlap smelled of coal oil. Caleb looked up slowly. Old Dawes crouched near the fence and pointed. Tracks here, one horse, came from the creek bend, left the same way. Mrs. Pike's eyes went hard, Greer. Mrs. Henshaw crossed herself, then seemed angry that fear had made her do it. Would he go that far? Clara looked at the smoke, the black boards, the horses trembling in the yard. Yes, she said, but he may not have come himself. Caleb stood. Boone. The name moved through the yard like a cold wind. Henry Vale swallowed. He was at the saloon last night when I left town, bragging about easy money. Caleb's face hardened in a way Clara had not seen before. This time when he started toward the corral, she touched his arm. Not alone. He looked down at her hand. The anger in him was strong. She could feel it like heat from the burned barn, but beneath it was something steadier now. He was not the broken man Greer had hoped to make him. No, Caleb said, not alone. By mid-morning, 5 riders went to Clearwater. Caleb, Clara and Mrs. Pike's buckboard, Jeb Turner, Old Dawes, and Henry Vale, who insisted on coming because he knew where Boone slept when drunk. Mrs. Pike stayed behind with Mrs. Henshaw to help guard the homestead and feed those who remained. Clearwater had barely opened its doors when they arrived. The saloon keeper, a narrow man named Fitch, tried to say Boone had not been there. Then he saw Old Dawes holding the coal oil burlap in a cloth and Jeb Turner standing behind him with the expression of a man ready to remember every lie aloud. Fitch changed his mind. He slept in the back room, he muttered. Ain't left yet. They found Elias Boone sitting on a cot, pulling on one boot. When he saw Caleb, he went white. Now hold on, Boone said. Caleb stood in the doorway. His burned hand was wrapped. His coat smelled of smoke. Ash still marked his cheek. Did Greer pay you? Boone looked from Caleb to Clara, then to the men behind them. "I don't know what you're speaking of." Clara stepped into the room and held up the scrap of burlap. "Coal oil was used at the barn. Tracks came from the creek bend. Henry heard you had easy money. You lied under oath yesterday. Lying again would be a poor habit to keep." Boone licked his lips. Caleb said nothing. That silence did more than shouting. Boone's shoulders sagged. "He said no one would get hurt," he whispered. Jeb cursed under his breath, but Clara lifted a hand. "Who said?" Boone looked at the floor. "Greer." The room went still. "He told me to scare you off," Boone said. "Said burn the hay lean-to, not the barn entire. Said Mercer would blame himself and withdraw final proof rather than risk more trouble." Caleb's voice was low. "You came near killing my horses." "I didn't mean that." "You never mean what happens after your cowardice." Boone flinched as if struck. Clara watched Caleb carefully. Here was the place where revenge could have risen. A lesser story might have turned on fists, but Caleb did not move toward Boone. He stood with the weight of Ruth, the fire, the land, and every stolen year in his eyes. "You will write it," Caleb said. Boone stared. "All of it Greer paying you. Greer telling you to lie. Greer telling you to set the fire. You will sign it before witnesses." Boone shook his head. "He'll ruin me." Clara stepped closer. "He already has. The difference is whether you let him take the last clean piece of you with him." For the first time, Boone looked at her not with fear, but with shame. Henry Vale ran to fetch Mr. Toland. Within the hour, Elias Boone sat at a saloon table with trembling hands and wrote a confession while half of Clearwater crowded outside, pretending not to watch through the windows. He wrote that Silas Greer had paid him to testify falsely. He wrote that Greer had known about the stolen horse and money from the night Ruth died, and used it to hold Boone quiet. He wrote that Greer had given him coal oil, and told him a small fire would frighten Caleb Mercer away from final proof. When Boone signed, Mr. Toland signed as witness. So did Jeb Turner, Old Dawes, and Henry Vale. Clara signed last, her name steady beneath theirs. Silas Greer was found at the land office. He denied everything until Mr. Toland placed Boone's confession on the counter. Then he looked past the clerk and saw Clara standing in the doorway. Something in his face changed. "Not guilt. Hatred." "You," he said. Clara walked inside, the smoke of Barrow Creek still clinging to her dress. "No," she said, "not me. Every person you counted on staying quiet." Behind her stood Caleb. Behind Caleb stood Jeb, Dawes, Henry, Mrs. Pike, Mrs. Henshaw, and half the town of Clearwater, gathered by word that had traveled faster than Greer ever could. Mr. Toland's voice shook, but he did not step back. "Mr. Greer, this confession and supporting evidence will be sent to the territorial office. Your contest against Barrow Creek is suspended pending investigation." Greer's eyes swept the room. For once there was no lonely widow, no grieving man, no frightened clerk alone across from him. There was a community, and the papers were no longer in his hand. By sunset, Silas Greer had left Clearwater under watch of the county deputy, not in chains like some dime novel villain, but stripped of the thing he prized most, the clean respectability that had hidden his thefts. His pending claims were questioned. His old contests were reopened for review. Men who had once nodded to him on the street now turned their backs. Justice did not roar that day. It settled like a door being locked against a thief. When Caleb and Clara returned to Barrow Creek, the homestead smelled of smoke, wet earth, and tired hope. Neighbors had covered the burned barn wall with canvas. The horses were calm. The hens had been returned to the coop. Someone had set supper on the kitchen table. Clara stood by the porch and looked at Ruth's roses. The outer leaves were black at the edges, but near the center one small bud remained closed and green. Caleb came to stand beside her. "I thought I lost it last night," he said. "So did I." He looked toward the fields, not just the barn. Clara knew what he meant. He turned to her then. The evening light was soft on his tired face. His burned hand hung at his side, wrapped in clean cloth. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and found, to his own surprise, that something inside him still lived. I have final proof to file, he said. The deed is not done yet. No, but Greer won't stop it now. Caleb nodded. For a moment, he seemed ready to say more. Clara felt it coming and feared it, not because she did not want to hear it, but because wanting had become a dangerous country for her. He only said, I'd like you to come with me when I file. As a witness. As the woman who saved the place. Clara looked away. Across the yard, the old shutter knocked once in the evening wind. Not like a warning now, more like a tired heart still beating. I will come, she said. That night, after the neighbors left and Caleb had gone to settle the horses, Clara sat alone in the kitchen. Ruth's ledger lay closed on the table. Thomas's watch ticked beside it. 2 lives, 2 losses, 2 homes that had shaped her, one taken and one nearly burned. She opened her trunk and took out the old deed papers from Red Willow Bend. She had kept them, though they meant nothing now, creased, stamped, useless, a paper grave. For the first time in 2 years, she did not feel only pain when she looked at them. She felt knowledge. She felt survival. She felt the strange truth that what had broken her had also armed her. Caleb appeared in the doorway and stopped when he saw the papers. Your old claim. Yes. He stepped in slowly. Do you miss it? Clara ran her fingers over the worn fold. Every day, less sharply now. He sat across from her. I wish I could give it back. No one can. His eyes stayed on hers. The lamp flame bent softly between them. Then I wish you a place no man like Greer can take. Clara's hand stilled. Outside, the wind moved over the fields Ruth had once planned. Caleb had nearly lost, and Clara had fought to save. The future stood close to the door, close enough to hear breathing. But before either of them could speak again, a knock came from the porch. Caleb rose and opened it. Mrs. Pike stood there holding a folded telegram, her face bright with something that looked like disbelief. It came by evening rider, she said, from the Territorial Land Office. Caleb took it. Clara stood. He opened the telegram and read the first line. Then he stopped. His eyes lifted to Clara, filled with wonder and fear together. What does it say? She whispered. Caleb handed it to her. The message was short. Because of evidence submitted against Silas Greer, prior contested claims may be reviewed upon petition. At the bottom, in official print, was the name of her lost land. Red Willow Bend. Clara's breath left her. The homestead she thought was gone forever had just called her name from the ashes. Clara read the telegram 3 times before the words found their way into her heart. Because of evidence submitted against Silas Greer, prior contested claims may be reviewed upon petition. Red Willow Bend. The name seemed to rise from the paper like smoke from an old fire. For 2 years, Clara had carried that land as a grief she could not set down. She had told herself it was gone. She had told herself the cabin had likely sagged, the well rope rotted, the bean rows vanished under weeds. She had told herself no good came from looking backward at what could not be restored. But the telegram trembled in her hand, and suddenly the past was not a grave. It was a door. Caleb stood very still across from her. Mrs. Pike waited in the doorway, her eyes wet though her mouth stayed firm, as if she dared anyone to mention it. The lamp on the table cast gold over Ruth's ledger, Thomas's watch, and the official telegram that had arrived like a miracle with dust on its boots. Clara lowered herself into a chair. I don't understand, she whispered. Mrs. Pike stepped inside. It means Greer's old dealings are being questioned. It means if you petition, they may look at what he did to you. May, Clara said. Yes, Mrs. Pike answered. May is not nothing. Caleb looked at the telegram, then at Clara. You should file. His voice was gentle, but it carried a hurt he was trying to hide. Clara heard it. Only hours ago, he had wished her a place no man like Greer could take. Now the land she had lost had reached for her again. Red Willow Bend, Thomas's land, her first dream, the place where she had buried her young hope in straight garden rows. She looked at Caleb, and the room seemed to split into 2 futures. One road led back to Red Willow Bend. The other stayed at Barrow Creek. For a moment, Clara could not breathe beneath the weight of choosing. The next morning, she rode to Red Willow Bend. Caleb went with her, but he did not crowd her with words. He drove the wagon while Clara sat beside him, the telegram folded in her reticule and Thomas's watch pinned inside her dress. The road was long and pale beneath the sun. Grass rolled on either side, washed silver by the wind. Neither of them spoke much. As they neared the old claim, Clara felt her hands grow cold. She knew the bend in the creek before she saw it. She knew the cottonwoods taller now. She knew the ridge where Thomas used to stand at sundown. Then the cabin came into view. It had not fallen. That almost broke her. The roof sagged on one side, the door hung crooked. Greer had not lived there, of course he had not. Men like him did not love land, they collected it. He had rented the grazing and left the home to weather. Clara climbed down before the wagon fully stopped. The yard was wild. Grass had swallowed the path stones. The well stood with its handle rusted but upright. The little garden plot was nearly gone, yet in one corner, stubborn as memory, a patch of sage still grew. She walked to the cabin door and touched the wood. Thomas had hung that door crooked and laughed when she complained. "It keeps the wind humble," he had said. Clara pressed her palm flat against it. For a long while, she did not cry. She only stood there feeling the years inside the grain of the wood. Caleb remained by the wagon, hat in his hands, giving her the space a sacred place deserved. At last, Clara pushed the door open. Dust stirred. Sunlight fell across the floorboards. The room was almost empty. A broken chair, a rusted stove, a nail in the wall where Thomas's coat once hung. Near the hearth, half hidden under dirt and dry leaves, Clara saw something small and blue. She bent and picked it up. A button. From the dress, she had worn the spring Thomas planted the first corn. Then the tears came. Not loud, not wild. Just a deep, quiet breaking, as if a locked room inside her had opened at last. Caleb stepped to the doorway, but did not enter. "Clara." She closed her fingers around the button. "I thought if I ever stood here again, I'd want it back more than anything." "And do you?" She looked around the cabin. She saw Thomas in every corner. She saw herself younger, laughing with flour on her sleeve, angry at weeds, hopeful over rain, tired in the good way a woman is tired when the labor belongs to her. Then she saw what was missing. Not just Thomas. Life. The place held memory, but not breath. Barrow Creek breathed now. Ruth's roses by the porch, Caleb's quiet laugh at supper, the hens settling back to their coop after the fire, Mrs. Pike bringing receipts, Mrs. Henshaw pretending not to care while caring more than most, Ruth's ledger open beside Thomas's watch. Clara had spent 2 years believing home was a place that had been stolen. But perhaps home was also the place where grief was not erased, but given room to sit beside new hope. She stepped out of the cabin with the blue button in her hand. "I want justice," she said. "I want the truth written right. I want Greer's theft named for what it was." Caleb nodded slowly. "But I don't think I want to live here again." He looked at her then, and something like wonder moved across his face. Clara turned toward the wild garden. "Thomas is here, part of me is here, but my life is not standing in that doorway anymore." The wind moved through the cottonwoods, carrying the creek's soft murmur. Caleb came closer, still careful. "Where is it?" Clara looked at him. She could have answered plainly. She could have said Barrow Creek. She could have said with you. But some truths were too large to throw down all at once. So she opened her hand and showed him the blue button. "I think it is wherever the past can be honored without being the only thing left." Caleb understood. They filed 2 petitions that week. One for Caleb's final proof on Barrow Creek. One for review of Clara's lost claim at Red Willow Bend. This time, Clara did not stand alone at the land office counter. Caleb stood beside her. Mrs. Pike stood behind her with a tin box of copies. Mrs. Henshaw held Ruth's ledger like scripture. Henry Vale, no longer looking quite so young, carried the witness statements. Mr. Toland accepted each paper with a seriousness that seemed to grow from his shame over past silence. The Territorial Review did not return Red Willow Bend overnight. The law did nothing tenderly, but it did reopen the claim, cancel Greer's fraudulent hold, and place the land under review for restoration or compensation. More important to Clara, the record changed. Her loss was no longer marked as failure without question. It was marked as contested under misconduct. Sometimes justice came not as a whole house rebuilt, but as one lie crossed out in black ink. Caleb's final proof came through before first frost. The deed arrived on a clear morning after the first thin ice formed in the water bucket. Mr. Toland wrote it out himself, perhaps because some papers deserved to be delivered with humility. Caleb took the envelope on the porch, but he did not open it right away. He looked at Clara. "You should open it. It has your name on it." His eyes held hers. "Your hand is in every inch of what saved it." Clara's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The deed was plain, official, and not nearly grand enough for what it meant. Barrow Creek was proved. Safe. No longer a claim waiting to be challenged by every clean-coated thief who came riding by. Land, house, barn, garden, well, roses, and fields stood now under lawful title. Caleb exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding that breath for 2 years. Mrs. Pike, who had somehow known to arrive that morning, wiped her eyes and blamed the cold. Mrs. Henshaw said a prayer without asking permission. Jeb Turner declared his mule had believed in the outcome all along. That evening after the neighbors left, Clara found Caleb by Ruth's roses. The burned leaves had been trimmed away. The green bud that survived the fire had opened into a small late bloom, pale and brave against the coming frost. Caleb held the deed in one hand. "I have something to ask you," he said. Clara's heart became very still. He was nervous. She could see it in the way his thumb worried the edge of the paper. "I loved Ruth," he said. "I will love her all my days. I loved the child we lost, though I held him only once. For a long time I thought love ended where grief began. Then you came here and showed me grief is not a locked gate. It is ground. Hard ground, maybe, but things can still grow in it." Clara's eyes filled. Caleb stepped closer. "I hired you because this place needed help, but you gave it more than work. You gave it courage. You gave it truth. You gave it back its name. And somewhere between the garden rows, the ledgers, the fire, and the mornings when this house smelled of bread again, you gave me back a life I did not think I deserved." He unfolded the deed. "I went to Mr. Toland this afternoon. There is a way to amend the title after marriage. If you'll have me, Clara Whitcomb, I want your name beside mine on Barrow Creek, not as hired help, not as a guest, not as a woman saving land that belongs to someone else." His voice softened. "As my wife, as the keeper of this place with me, as the woman whose hand and heart already live here." Clara looked down at her own hands. Were cruffined, scarred, stronger than they had been when she lost Red Willow Bend. These hands had buried Thomas, packed a trunk, signed petitions, pulled weeds from Ruth's garden, dragged water toward a burning barn, and held Caleb back from anger when truth needed to speak first. She thought of Thomas's watch ticking in the kitchen. She thought of Ruth's ledger. She thought of the little blue butt now resting in the drawer beside Ruth's letters. There was room, she realized, for all of them. Love did not demand that the old dead be pushed out to make space for the living. A good home had more mercy than that. "Yes," Clara whispered. Caleb's breath caught. She looked up at him fully. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you. I will put my name beside yours. I will love this land without pretending I am not afraid. I will keep Ruth's roses. I will remember Thomas. I will stand with you in the lane if trouble comes again. And I will not spend the rest of my life acting like what was stolen from me stole my right to hope." Caleb reached for her hand. This time there was no hesitation. His burned palm was still bandaged. Her fingers were rough with work. Their hands fit not like something young and easy, but like 2 broken tools made useful again by care. They married before winter settled hard. It was not a grand wedding. It was better than that. The ceremony took place on the porch at Barrow Creek, with Ruth's roses trimmed for the season and a clear sky spread over the fields. Mrs. Pike stood beside Clara. Jeb Turner brought his mule and tied a ribbon to its bridle. Mrs. Henshaw cried openly and denied it afterward. Henry Vale wore a coat too large for him and smiled as if he had helped save the whole county, which in a way he had. After the vows, Caleb placed Thomas's watch in Clara's hand. "I had it cleaned in town," he said. "It keeps good time." Clara opened it. The ticking was clear. Then she gave Caleb Ruth's ledger, rebound with a new strip of leather. "Keep writing," she told him. He smiled. "We will." In the months that followed, Barrow Creek became known for more than butter, horses, and clean fences. It became the place people came when a notice from the land office frightened them. Widows came with folded papers. Young couples came with questions. Old men came pretending they only needed coffee, then pulled claim forms from inside their coats. Clara sat with them at the kitchen table and taught them what Greer had once used against her. Residence, cultivation, improvements, witnesses, receipts, records, truth written before trouble came. Red Willow Bend was eventually restored to Clara's name, but she did not move back. She leased the grazing to a decent family and kept the cabin standing. Each spring, she visited and planted sage by the door, not because she wished to return, but because some places deserved to be remembered in living green. Silas Greer never regained his old standing. His contests were reviewed. His schemes unraveled one by one, not through vengeance, but through testimony, records, and the courage of people he had counted on staying ashamed. The county learned to watch men with clean coats and hungry eyes. Years later, folks still told the story of the widow who came to Barrow Creek for wages and saved a homestead from fire, fraud, and sorrow. But Clara never told it that way. When children asked, she would sit on the porch beside Caleb, with Ruth's roses blooming by the steps and Thomas's watch ticking in her apron pocket. She would tell them the first woman of Barrow Creek planted beauty. The second woman helped it bloom again. And the man who lived there learned that a heart could hold the dead with honor and still make room for the living. Then Clara would look across the garden, where the rows ran straight and green under the wide Montana sky. She had once believed losing a home meant the future was gone. Now she knew better. A future could be stolen, yes. It could be burned, delayed, buried under weeds, or hidden in a drawer beneath old letters. But sometimes, with brave hands and honest love, it could be found again. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, pain, and justice meet on the frontier. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through Ruth's roses and the last light rested on Caleb's fields, Clara Mercer would stand in the doorway of Barrow Creek and see a future she no longer feared losing.